So, I honestly haven't even figured out what I want the name of this to be. Um, but regardless, I know exactly what I'm wanting to talk about. And, so, before we get too into it, I was watching this FD Signifier video, or is it Signify B-Sides? You know who I'm talking about. And so, yeah. And so I just wanted to, I guess, talk about the inspiration a little bit, or trigger, I guess is technically more correct, because he did a video about Bamboozled, and why I say not necessarily the same as, triggered or whatever, is because I actually started to watch Bamboozled, a few months ago. And in the middle of watching it, I stopped. And I feel like some of the things he addressed in his video was a bit touching on why I stopped, or at least maybe is like a reflection of why I stopped, which, I mean, now that I think about it in a literal sense, it is a reflection on why I stopped, which is because, and I mean, then I also had a bit of an apprehension to even doing this video, but I know, again, focusing on audience, let me keep everything a bit more linear. And back to the main point of why I stopped watching. In the middle of it, the second time I was going to watch it. And it's kind of because it reminds me of an issue I see with like comedy and how we handle certain bigoted ideologies. There's essentially like this, chicken egg-esque, maybe I should do egg chicken-esque, but yeah, this chicken or the egg-esque sort of dynamic, where sometimes people say, oh, it's not that serious, in regards to what they're joking about, but at the same time, the joke literally, like, it's a joke. The joke literally reminds people of bigoted ways of seeing the world. And so they say, it's not, that big of a thing. It's just a joke. And, crazy me being, laughless liberals, or how the saying used to go, and just boring old and all that stuff, which, by the way, I think I'm actually starting to get into my accepting the boring title, bag. Yeah, I'll be boring, I guess, which goes into a whole nother thing about anything you love can and will be used against you. But again, we're gonna keep it linear, keep it where we're at right now. So back to the comedy. And so, if you've interacted with me long enough, you'll know the way I worded something probably was intentional. It probably means something. And so, yeah. So when I say things like regurgitating bigoted ways of viewing the world, and again, when I say this time, more publicly about abusing or disabusing certain notions, sorry y'all, I got a new weave, so I'm like flipping my weave, but yeah, it keeps getting in my face. Yeah. Anywho, yeah, that's probably intentional. So back to the crux of it, which also goes back to the beginning of this video. I actually was trying to figure out, to do the video, to not do the video. So there was a topic at hand, right? And do I even want to speak on the topic at hand? Then there's the method or the logistics into actually getting it out there. And so the easier of those two to talk about, the logistics of actually getting out there. I was thinking, well, if I speak on this, where should it go? In what way should I speak on it? Video, audio, which I think, by the way, I need to get, like, maybe try to podcast route. I don't know. But I mean, I do like the visual medium as well. But, also, time wise, what am I looking at here? Am I gonna, do a breakdown, like, second by second of the movie, of the video that, triggered it, of, related books and things like that. And then I was like, you know what? I actually truly am a busy person. And I'm also not up here trying to make it seem like I know all the things or have researched all the things. So yeah, I'm okay with giving it more as a response sort of video rather than but yeah. Again, just what works for me, and my time constraints and why I'm doing it. So back to the more complex side that I just mentioned earlier before we get back to the main, comedy and bigotry sort of thing, which is to even talk about this topic. And even now, as I like try to make sure I'm saying what I want to say, trying to remember like all the mechanics and logistics around this to actually talk to the mic so it sounds like I'm talking to you, because in my mind I'm talking to you even though I'm like looking at my computer, but my computer and the microphone is not the same thing, so let me talk to the microphone. Since again, going back to something that already tied into different parts, it's clearly meant to be the proxy for you, the listener, or at least my proxy for you, the listener, since as a matter of fact that's how these things work and we all know that and agree to it, or I guess agree to it because it's the only way it can work. But yeah, so I'm thinking like, okay, being my particular perspective on things and how I might have shown to sense, detect, intuit, insight, I guess, in the INSIGHT sense, things that people might not have noticed. It comes with its own complications about, again, should I speak on this? Because clearly there's some things that might be obvious to me that isn't as obvious to everybody. So again, that's where I get into the, well, should I speak on it? And if I do, again, this is why, try to post it on YouTube or something like that. Also, I do the whole Mastodon thing as well. I really hope they like rebrand the name for that, because I really like it. I just don't really like the name that much. But yeah, or like, I mean, sometimes I do Instagram stuff for other things, but anywho, back to this. And so yeah, and I'm guessing maybe it's just the fact that this is like, again, I guess technically third time I'm seeing stuff about this movie, and so this time a more detailed breakdown. So I'm like, okay, well, I probably, I guess, won't end up accidentally doing harm or anything like that. So yeah, and plus, I mean, technically my channel is small, so if I'm the only viewer, to me it's still big, but whatever. And on top of that, if I didn't do, 100%, 10% of the 110% of the research and all that, like, again, I doubt I'm gonna do any, serious damage. And I mean, people, some people eat up lies every day. So I mean, people still believe in Trump. So whatever. Like someone said, you have the right to be dumb. But of course, I'm not trying to, help that. So, but like I said, probably, I don't think, I would have anything too harmful out there. So yeah, so that's why I was thinking, yeah, let me go ahead and do this. So yeah, comedy can actually, again, just speaking from how I see things, it can actually reinforce some bigoted perspectives. Like, how often, for instance, all the trans jokes and things like that, or even black jokes, how often are we gonna then hear those jokes being reiterated in, daily life by people that consume that media, you know? And so then you get into situations in real life that just happen to be vaguely similar. Now, again, getting that extra attention, that extra dopamine hit. And so when you talk about, again, bigoted ways of viewing the world being reinforced, getting life breathed into them again to stay relevant, yeah, comedy can do that. It's one of those things, you can't say, what you do is powerful, but at the same time, don't mind you because, you're nothing too serious, one mic or Uchiwali, which one is it, And so when we talk about these perspectives that then can become modalities to oppression, etc., or wealth, as we've seen how people get a bag off of racists, you have to start thinking about perceived glorification and value. Again, because this whole instance, culmination, if you will, reminded me of Kooning and Oppenheimer. It's just that issue of, again, perceived glorification and value. Is this really something worth doing? Is this something that really is necessary? And is this something, and I guess when I say and there, it's the and, the other side. Is this something that actually is, glorified, if you will? And I'm already getting ahead of myself because, glory or liking, people, places, and things, or thinking highly of them, etc. But again, we'll kind of work our way back to that. Keeping it linear. Again, Kooning. A big part of what we're seeing as the racist propagation of said bamboozled type of images is like an anti-glory, if you will. And that goes back into the whole thing of their perception. People will try to make it seem like, oh, they're just, the okay black people, and it's not, bad and everything like that. It's fun. We're laughing. How can it be bad? Um, and again, it's the perceived glory or anti-glory. Um, if people if people think of you as a stink bug, of course they're going to be happy to see you wallow in shit. I mean, the in that sense, from their perspective, again, their perspective, the logic is logicking. You're a shit bug. You're in shit. Everybody's happy, right? Like, what's the problem here? But I want to say the rub, is that the correct terminology? But I guess at least where it intersects or couples with is the value, right? Because, to a certain extent, we can understand having to do, a not so great job, again, whether it's getting glory or getting anti glory, etc. We can understand that if there's a certain amount or type of value, right? And I guess that kind of goes a little bit into what some people were talking about, Faustian algorithms and blah, blah, blah. But anywho, again, today's video and keeping it linear. So what value do you really think like you're getting out of when they're regurgitating these bigoted ways of viewing the world? And so that goes into what value you think, it relates to the cooning, what value you think you're getting out of this, effort. And then, and so yeah, it really touched on the little toy, the little like toy bank that she had for the guy, because it's like, yeah, they're consuming value, and in the way that it's shown, it doesn't seem to accumulate, right? Because it just goes in his mouth and that's it. And so it doesn't really seem to accumulate. But even when you think about, well, it actually does accumulate, but still, how do they get that value back out, right? Once they decide to stop and stop the feeding and even reverse, how do they get it out? I mean, but right, especially when you think of like commerce, import, export. We've seen how the toy bank imports and when it exports, bankruptcy, things like that, selling off different items, how many artists you hear about selling off their discography or whatever. Again, sticking to the fact that I'm not an expert in that sort of area, but yeah, which actually goes back again, see, but that goes back into the power gaps. And so you have this power gap of the fact that if said person stops doing the thing, which in this regard is related to the job or, again, the attainment of glory or anti-glory, if they stop doing that, like we've seen in the movie, they're going to be back out in the streets. Or, and that happens simply because, again, the person in this regard, which was, again, interestingly, in a way, I guess, objectified into or personified, again, by proxy into the bank, has been economically ostracized. And again, keeping it on power gaps, we can talk about, well, who decided, because ostracization is a thing that it's not, you don't get there simply by one person, no longer engaging. That's where you get that communal culture power. And again, going back to, power imbalances, and the fact that that power has been accumulated into few people's hands. And so, yes, you can think of politicians, but again, it goes back to, anything you love can and will be used against you. Because politicians are just people that we all, like to a certain extent. And that's one interesting thing I think about different presidential candidates as being the, I guess, example of how thin the line between like politician and just another really popular person is. For instance, what was the first president that was like an actor? But with politicians, yeah, we do generally expect them to actually have certain skills of the trade, so to speak. But at the same time, it is essentially fundamentally, or at least strongly has a popularity component to it. And we all know that popularity can be influenced by, ding ding ding, glory. And that glory is actually, it's just a human thing. And that's one of the ways in which I feel like this movie did kind of help illuminate the fact that, that even the Bamboozled show, or whatever it was called, was popular among both black and white people. And so that takes us back to the crux of it all. The audience. The audience for the comedy. And the context, because, the comedy should, more or less be directed to the audience, but I don't know, maybe I'm just thinking about general thoughts and communication, and, I'm not a professional comedian, so, anywho. And so essentially this entire thing picks up post-slavery, which, again, let me stop, again, linear, keep it linear. When they talk about the minstrel shows and how much of it was connected to stereotypes around slaves, in that time, with that power gap, the racists did, and I'll come back to that because I just want to say, this thing that affects both black people and white people, and especially both black people who are coon or not coon, or thinking that they're actively working in, a pro-black direction versus just being absent-minded. Again, it affected everybody. With that power gap that they, again, whole nother video. But yeah, back to this. With that power gap, they try to define blackness and constrain it. And that constraint was typically among, what part of humanity black people could and could not have, i.e., what type of human they are, i.e., are you a poo bug or not? Speaking of things that are common among humans, terrorism, I'm just thinking recently about some studies that were done about Nazis, and I just still am baffled. Like, it's literally an ideology that came from a foreign territory, and in its transmission resulted in the death of millions, and are inspiring people current day to either directly kill millions or just be very haphazardly open to said things about said millions. But again, that doesn't get the same scrutiny as everyone else because, again, bigoted perceptions about what's, meant to be and not, and what's right, and, God and all that sort of stuff. And by the way, I still feel like, I guess, overall weird in a way because, like, this late in my transition, I'm still, well, is it late? But anywho, I'm still, like, trying to think about, like, voice training and stuff like that, and will I, won't I? Anywho. And so, yeah. And so when we talk about them defining what's good and bad and God and reality and all that, we have to keep in mind the audience, who they're trying to convince their power or convince for power. And it is here in where racism lives, deciding power, based on race in a illogical sort of way. You get how racism has impacted, everyone, and how it's an attempt to steal humanity. And so again, back to my main point about being instances of propagating racism and its perspective, i.e., or not unlike a show for an audience. And so how this has impacted people, again, not just black people, because again, the thing is, I think we're still kind of grappling with like the, messed upness of it all. And so how it really can, some things, when you think about wounds on the body, some will heal quicker than others. And so, yeah, it really can reach out, through the millennia, eras, etc. And so when I think about, the quality in regards to how it all connects to whether these attempts for storytelling are, good enough quality and worth the view, worth participating in. again, like most things, because the audience is paying attention money, obviously, but if it's worth it, is again back to the audience, um, because that's who it's intended for. How is it going to um, help or harm them? Which is again why I kind of stopped watching it midway through, because it was like, well, you know, before I could transition to it for it being completely complete, I kind of already know this message. I kind of agree with this message already. So do I still need to rewatch, an hour or something or 2 hour or something video with, like you said, how it ended, you know? And so that's when I was like, you know what? Again, for me and where I'm at, I'm good. And I think sometimes that can be the issue with the idea about closing ranks and weeding out deviants, quote unquote. And so, before I resume those topics, it's been a thing I've been contemplating recently about how sometimes, there's a yes and in the sense of, where do we go from here? And so, again, understanding that sometimes, like, when you're doing the and going from here, that transition, yeah, certain things might make sense for you or not, and it depends, again, your journey, all of that. Which is where the enforced hegemony can become an issue, especially when you think about how, like I say, racism has influenced everyone, including pro-black, anti-black, etc. And so when we talk about hegemony being the power of the audience, then what type of critique do we lay around the one versus many idea, again, in regards to where it was at, the show, the context, slavery / post-slavery. To what extent, which, by the way, I wish they had more movies like about, post-slavery, how like the black community was particularly dealing with that sort of new dynamic. I don't know. Maybe I need to just rewatch stuff that's already out there from a different perspective. I don't know. Because I'm thinking about a few that kind of touched on it a little bit. But yeah. To what extent do we want to continue, when we think of culture, particularly pro-black state of mind culture, to what extent do you want to continue certain practices? Which, I mean, is a big thing because, that's one of the ways the audience empowers. And so, again, that's why it's one of those things that I feel people, or maybe I just, feel the need to advocate the value of like the individual. Because with your particular need, journey, etc. I mean, sometimes it just might be, uniquely you, or just again, just something that the culture generally hasn't seen it for, etc. And so when we talk about people, again, being empowered by the audience because, of perceived glory, or, anti-glory, the audience, whatever, and who they empower to utilize said hegemony, said medium, again, that perspective, when they're deciding who they'll give the brunt of that to in regards to, again, ostracization. It's kind of a funny word, but yeah. I mean, because that really like gets into the whole like culture aspect of it, and because those values and adhering to those values, again, when we talk about things being over, eons and generations, and I don't know if eons is technically the right word, but a long ass time. We, the audience, have to decide what's needed right now. And a part of that, implies being, conscious of what you consume and what you need, and I guess information and emotion and all that. And knowing, how to balance the current situation we're in with what we need to be in, with the reality of both versus what's just stuff we do just because culture or tradition, and because all those sorts of things are the type of thing that should be going into what we determine is what we're going to consume, what we're going to watch, what we're going to empower. And so when we talk about things like hegemony and self machinations of the community, being what's another word, uniform, what is it for? Because it could just be, a petty. And so the people we empower, they'll thus decide what can be relaxing or funny. Which is why I feel like the group in the movie might have embodied this complexity in the chosen like response to Bamboozled. So them being, the group that's meant to show like, oh, the more pro-black side of it, even if, extreme, are still seen as like not quite what was right or needed or useful. Since again, they did kill like the least, empowered person in the movie, which again goes back into, deciding who or what we empower and what practices we'll, continue or discontinue. Which was why I made the decision to devote my present to something that did not showcase as much black diminishment, and thus work to further disabuse my psyche of the ever ready white supremacist penetration of ideological racism. So, yeah. Again, because, I had actually seen the movie before, and, thus already understood the, quote unquote moral of the story, which goes into the thing of how moral is supposed to be like similar or another word to value, and how, again, I typically try to differentiate a moral between an ethic, which is ethics like how you're supposed to treat others and stuff like that. But yeah. So with them, empowered to be the pro-black party within the movie, but yet still, like, say, killing someone that was the least responsible out of everyone. We see that power to decide what people should like or can shun or find funny can be wrongly made against the individual, especially in a society that's having had corrupted leaders or cultural values. And so back to the issue at hand, comedy, and how that influences, perspectives and culture. Yeah, some of us are going to be stingy with our laugh, where we give the value, moral, glory, whatever you want to call it, to. If you're going to try to use something people like, as a way of getting, again, laughs, money, glory, whatever. Yeah, it makes sense. People, like I say, will be a bit more skeptical when anything you like can and will be used against you, even if it is just for a chuckle. So anywho, yeah, like I said, that was, why I stopped mid movie, I guess, and am also just a-okay with my boring label. Anywho, yeah, have a good MLK day, and hope you enjoyed the discussion.